Hi everyone! Good evening and welcome to the Brennan Kitchen. This is the second week of our Comfort Soup series, and I'd like to tell you about one of my favorite soups, which also happens to be a pretty simple recipe called Lenten Corn Chowder. The ingredients are pretty basic: water, potatoes, carrots, celery, creamed corn, milk, cheese, and a little bit of salt and pepper. You can put a little bit of onion in there too, but you don't have to. This is a super easy soup to make, and I've been making it for over 20 years and I still love it. As you watch me make it, I want to tell you a little bit about where and when I got this recipe, some organizations that are connected to it in my mind, and what makes this soup special to me. So, way back in 1998, I started my year of service with an organization called the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, or LVC. Now, during LVC, volunteers live in intentional community with other volunteers while serving in nonprofit social justice organizations. These placements range from working with youth or seniors, the homeless or refugees, the disabled, or those with HIV or AIDS. A volunteer might work on environmental issues in neighborhood organizations or on national advocacy. Some placements did direct service and others were more administrative, but each placement site was unique. When I did my year of service, LVC had volunteers in 9 different cities around the country, and I was located in a house in St. Paul, Minnesota, my hometown. My placement site was at St. Paul Reformation Lutheran Church, and I served as their family ministry coordinator. St. Paul Reformation Lutheran was a unique church in the ELCA. It was America's first reconciling in Christ congregation. And St. Paul Reformation intentionally worked to welcome people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. The Reconciling in Christ, or RIC program, has been a public way for faith communities to see, name, celebrate, and advocate for people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions in the Lutheran Church. The RIC program is made up of congregations, synods, colleges, seminaries, outdoor ministries, and other Lutheran organizations. There are now over 940 RIC communities in the ELCA and another 367 communities on their journey to becoming RIC. Now, given that St. Paul Reformation Lutheran Church had such an open and inclusive understanding of who was welcome in the congregation, this made my work as their family ministry coordinator all the more exciting because they had such a wide and diverse understanding of what it meant to be family. During this year, I continued to also experience a growing call to ordain ministry. And part of my desire to become a pastor was in part to become an advocate for others who felt called to become pastors, regardless of their sexual orientation. Sort of to get my foot in the door, so to speak, so I could hold that door open for others who felt called by God to worship and serve in the ELCA. But getting back to the soup. Another important and lasting part of my LVC experience was living in community with my 4 other housemates. I learned so much from them over the year, and we have lots of great memories, especially in the kitchen and around the table. Each of us was given a small stipend to cover our individual and communal necessities, but even with that stipend, we were still living under the poverty line. We didn't have money for extras. We had to pool our resources and live simply, and that meant cooking almost all of our meals from scratch. Rather than being a hardship, food became a lot of fun in our household. We cooked with a lot of vegetables, beans, and whole grains. Meat was a luxury because it cost more. One of the people in my house worked at a community garden and did neighborhood nutrition education with kids and adults. so she would sometimes bring home extras from the garden. We experimented a lot with recipes that year. Some of our cooking endeavors worked better than others, but we shared our successes and failures with each other, and all of us got so much better in the kitchen over that year. The Lenten Corn Chowder that you've been watching me make was a recipe given to me by Kurt Pose, who was the administrative assistant at St. Paul Reformation Lutheran where I worked. It was an easy and inexpensive recipe, and it became a favorite in our house that year. Not only because it tasted so good and was easy to make, but it was healthy and cheap too. As you have watched me make it, I've done the same portions that are listed in the recipe. When I made this during LVC and when I make it now for my own family, I sometimes double or even triple the recipe because it makes for great leftovers. But I didn't want to do that this evening because I wanted to show you that this is also a nice recipe if you're cooking for only one or two in your household. Also, I want to point out that I think this soup could also count as gluten-free. And for those of you who need to be watching the salt, you can cut back on that too. I think this soup is a comfort to me because it reminds me a bit of my Minnesota roots, and a bit of the different communities that helped to shape me who I am. This soup has great memories for me of St. Paul Reformation Lutheran Church, of my year serving in the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, and of my great housemates, but also of my family now too. Do you remember the housemate that I told you about, the one who worked at the community garden? Well, her name was and is Kristen Brennan, and about 5 years after our LVC year, I ended up meeting a cousin of hers when I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. His name was Dan Brennan, and I ended up marrying that guy. Anyway, thanks for listening to my story, and I hope you make and enjoy the soup. Have a good night.